Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Last spring, my husband Dave and I were both let go from our jobs. After months of fruitless searching, I finally got an offer from Acme Company. It wasn't my dream job, but my new boss, Mike, and the team seemed great. The problem was Mike's boss, Allison. She was supposed to act as a liaison between my team and hers, but instead she micromanaged me relentlessly. She constantly demanded I work overtime, canceled my time off, and berated me over insignificant issues. She even made nasty remarks about my looks and ethnicity. I put up with Allison's abuse because my family desperately needed the income. The final straw came one awful Friday. Allison screamed at me over a trivial scheduling issue, despite knowing I was grieving a family member's death. I broke down in front of Mike. He was understanding and said half of Allison's team had already quit due to her behavior. Mike offered to move me to a new team under him. I was so relieved. Unfortunately, the move didn't stop Allison's harassment. She continued bombarding me with demands, then marched to my desk, loudly proclaiming I was unqualified. Mike finally told her off, but the verbal assaults persisted. After 2 more miserable months, I abruptly quit with a resignation letter detailing Allison's offenses. Though Mike tried to convince me to stay, it was clear only firing Allison would fix the toxic culture she created. For 3 months, my family barely got by. We survived on breadcrumbs some nights just to pay the bills from medical and funeral costs. I must have applied to hundreds of jobs. Then, out of the blue, an old colleague named Jeff texted me. He had just joined Acme as a VP and asked for insights about the company. I gave him the inside scoop on areas for innovation. Jeff then offered me a role as his chief of staff. I jumped at the opportunity. At our first company-wide meeting, Jeff announced I would be his cause. I now sat 2 levels above Allison. And in the months since I had left, the remainder of her team had also quit. My old boss Mike congratulated me enthusiastically, but Allison took the low road, emailing Jeff to call me an idiot and liar and tried to get me fired. Jeff forwarded me her classless message and asked what was going on. I explained to Jeff that Allison was toxic for company culture. He only needed to check with Mike about her entire team quitting, read my old resignation letter, and see the nasty emails she sent her recent staff. Jeff swiftly canned Allison the next day. The first one is an entitled people story. Losing my wife Jane was the most difficult thing I've ever gone through. We were high school sweethearts and had been married for 15 happy years. She was my everything, my partner, my best friend, my soulmate. When Jane was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, it felt like my whole world collapsed. We fought hard against the disease, but after a year, the doctors said there was nothing more they could do. Jane wanted to spend her remaining days at home, surrounded by family. I quit my job to take care of her full time. Her mom, Liz, lived nearby and came over often to help out. Liz and I didn't always see eye to eye, but we put our differences aside for Jane's sake. Or so I thought. I started noticing Liz rummaging through Jane's jewelry box and personal documents when she thought I wasn't looking. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, assuming she was just looking for keepsakes of her daughter. When Jane passed, it was the most painful and heartbreaking moment of my life. As I made funeral arrangements, the last thing on my mind was inheritances and legal matters, but Liz had other plans. The day after Jane died, Liz showed up on my doorstep and boldly declared, "I'll be taking Jane's car and her half of the house." I was stunned. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," Liz snapped. "Jane's will clearly states I get the car and half the house." This was news to me. Jane and I had never discussed a will, let alone giving half our assets to her mother. I told Liz politely but firmly that I knew nothing about this supposed will, and she had no claim to our joint property. Liz huffed angrily and stormed off, yelling, "We'll see about that." I was shaken, but focused my energy on grieving and preparing a beautiful funeral service for my beloved Jane. The day of the funeral arrived, and as I stood by the casket to say a few words, Liz suddenly jumped up from her seat. "Before we proceed, I'd like to read my daughter's will," she announced loudly. I was stunned. "Now is not the time or place for this," I said through gritted teeth, trying to remain composed. But Liz ignored me and began reading from a document stating Jane had left her the car and half the house. The guests murmured in shock at this disruptive and frankly insane behavior. Trying to regain control, I stated firmly, "Jane never wrote any will. Whatever you have there is invalid. Please sit down so we can continue the service in peace." Liz's face turned red with fury. "How dare you?" she screamed. "I won't be pushed aside. Jane meant for me to have her things." At this point, my grief gave way to anger. I signaled security to escort Liz out while she shouted obscenities. With Liz gone, we were able to finish the service properly. Later at home, I took a closer look at the will Liz had brandished. It was obviously fake. The signature didn't even match Jane's handwriting. Furious at Liz's heartless lies, I immediately contacted my lawyer to make sure she received nothing. We discovered that Jane had written a legitimate will years ago, leaving everything to me. I provided a copy to the court, and they invalidated Liz's forged document. With this evidence in hand, I could easily fight any false inheritance claims. Liz flipped out when she realized her scheme had failed. She was cut off without a penny and thrown out of our lives for her despicable behavior. Losing Jane left a hole in my heart that could never be fully repaired. But surrounding myself with true, caring family and friends gave me comfort during those dark days. Jane meant the world to me, and being able to properly honor her memory without Liz's hatefulness was a gift. No greedy, manipulative mother-in-law could ever replace the deep, pure love Jane and I shared. In the end, nothing could take away the precious moments and memories we built in our time together. Those would be mine to cherish forever. The next one is a petty revenge story. I'm flying out of Philadelphia after visiting a good friend for a week. I travel quite frequently and like to make security checks as painless as possible for myself and everyone else involved. So usually the only things I need to place on the belt are my carry-on bag, shoes, and phone. I arrive at the security table, kick off my shoes, throw them in the bin with my phone and boarding pass so there's nothing in my hands. My bag is on my shoulder and the bin is in my hands, and I'm ready to go. Enter two wild Karens. Perhaps they are not full-blown Karens separately, but together their powers have amplified. Combined, the Karens have about 6 bins of toiletries, electronics, shoes, and other nonsense, and they are taking their sweet time. They obviously know this. As moments before I entered the line, Karen 1 had allowed someone to pass in front of them. Anxious to get through as I'm in a tight spot between the Karens in front, the stand where they check your boarding pass and ID behind me, and the table to my left, I cut around the other side to the table and ask Karen 1, "Do you mind if I just jump ahead?" Karen 1 is instantly miffed and responds, "No, and I don't know where you think you're going. That side is blocked off." "Not one to stay quiet," I respond. "Just trying to get my stuff on the belt, but fine, take your time." Both Karens ignore me, leave their bins on the table, and proceed to the body scanner. I stand there confused for a moment, still at the end of the table about 3 feet from the belt where items are supposed to be placed. Did they expect me to place all their items on the belt for them? No thanks. I grab my bin and bag, place them on the belt, and begin to move towards the body scanner. The guy who checks the boarding passes stops me to ask if the items left behind are mine. Nope, keep moving forward. I hear him calling across the security checkpoint to ask whose items have been left behind. I apologize to the casual bystander in this petty nonsense. I encounter the Karens on the other side as they look perplexed when my items come through first. I hear Karen 1 whisper to Karen 2, "Our stuff is still on the table on the other side." Yikes. I grab my items and leave, and the Karens have to return to the other side, push their items through, and get rescanned. Moral of the story: probably don't be rude to people if you're going to leave your stuff with them. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work at an amusement park, and we have this ride called Moby Dick. This ride is 100% controlled by the operator. A couple of weeks ago, this woman and her friend came up to my ride making fun of one of the kids that was on the ride. She was saying so many hateful things about how they look. Without even looking at her, I told her to stop. And this is how it went. Me: "You're literally talking about a 7-year-old like that. You need to stop or you will not be allowed on the rides." Karen: "But it's true, look at them." Me: "Don't disrespect other guests, please. It's not okay." Karen's friend: "Stop, Karen, before you get us in trouble again." Karen: "Whatever." Nah. When the ride was finished, I started letting the next group of people in. I said, "Do not pull down on the bars. Pick any seat you'd like," to everyone as they walked in, since pulling on the bars can break the seats over time. I let a group of young boys in before Karen's group, and they sat at the end seats. Karen marched over to the kids, yelling at them to get out of her seat and that she paid to sit at the end. Me: "Miss, please stop yelling at the kids or you will be removed from the ride with no refund in tickets." Karen. Don't tell me. Karen's friend. Stop it, Karen. Just sit in the middle. She complained the whole time walking to the middle seats and then pulled down the bar. I was thinking it was time to get a manager over, but I didn't want to bother them with her. Once I got everyone seated, I closed all the seat bars. When I was checking the seats, Karen's one was on the loose side, so I pushed it in a little to make it tighter. Karen, you're trying to kill me. First you left my seat open, now you're making it so I can't breathe. I ignored her and kept checking seats. When I finally started the ride, I slowly rocked it, and Karen was screaming to take her off, so I made the ride go faster, doing full circles now. Halfway during the ride, Karen screams, "Stop the ride, you ducking idiot!" She wants me to stop it, fine with me. I parked the ride at the top of the ride like I do when closing, but keeping the ride on. The 6 others on the ride weren't scared. The ride stopped. Karen started screaming bloody murder, crying and begging to be let down. The parents watching know what she said before their kids and know what's going on and start laughing. After around 30 seconds, she is still screaming, "Let me down." So I do, on the fastest setting. I start the ride spinning full speed. I made the ride a little longer since all the kids were having fun. Before I opened the seats, I screamed a warning. Me. Wait for the bars to be fully open and stay above your head before getting up. Stay seated. Karen pushed it up and got up, having the bar fall back down and hit her in the head. Her friend laughed at her and got up, walking her off the ride. The next one is an entitled people story. So my husband, 34M, and I, 36F, were coming back from upstate New York. We went to see my brother, who is like 4 hours away from us by Greyhound. It was a long trip, and I have kidney issues due to my lupus. So I rushed to the bathroom when we got to Port Authority. For info, I am short, chubby, and use a walker. So when I got to the bathroom, I had no stalls to go to but one. There were lots of stalls. However, I could only use the disabled person stall because it was the only one big enough for my walker. So I waited outside of the stall for a while and then knocked when it got to the 10-minute point. The woman huffed and said, "Use the other stall, lady." I tell her I can't because I am disabled. The lady gets up. This woman grumbled and I heard a flush twice. The toilets are automatic, so I am guessing she was getting up and it flushed again before she fully got up. She walks out of the stall, and she was bigger than me in height and weight. She had long green cornrows and name-brand everything. She was wearing a tracksuit. She looked mad. I really couldn't wait anymore, though. So I rush by her and go to the bathroom. It was quick, but what I didn't expect was the lady banging on the stall, telling me to get out. She did this over and over. I tell her I am almost done. And when I walk out, it was the same woman. She says, "You stepped on my shoe. Do you know how much this is? More than 10 of your carts. If I see you again, I will make sure you are a paraplegic." Not a typo. This is how she said it. I am freaking out because I think this crazy lady is going to kill me for leaving a tiny mark on her shoe. This is when I hear, "Lady, shut your fat mouth up. You ain't no thug." This woman then darts her eyes to this 4'11" granny. The woman had to be 80-something, but this granny was tough. This girl looked upset. The granny then looks at me and says, "Baby, are you okay?" I nod and she smiles. She then drags the larger woman out. I am guessing this was her grandma because they looked similar, and she had the fear of God in her eyes. That was a weird bathroom trip, but one I will not forget. The next one is an entitled parent story. I, a 25-year-old woman, moved back home a while ago because of some issues I was dealing with, but being back in my family home has been a nightmare. My father was the main reason I left the house a year ago. I kept minimal contact after a while, and I really thought he had turned a new leaf and changed. I thought everything was going to be okay. I have to bring him his tea every 2-3 hours, pick up his dirty plates and cups from the basement, bring him his snacks, his meals, his juice, his medication, anything you can name. When I bring him his food, he complains and says I gave him too much. Why would I do that? I'm starting to get very overwhelmed and stressed out, as well as feeling sad for myself every day. I also cook and clean for him and the rest of my family. When he calls me or tells me to do something, he repeats that same thing about 3-4 times, and it really gets on my nerves. My dad is constantly asking for money 24/7 because he claims he is broke. I can't go anywhere past midnight. If I leave at any time of day, it's followed up by, "Where are you going? Why are you going outside? What is there for you to do out there?" Come back early so you can help me. I'm tired and exhausted. My sister recently left, and all he can do is badmouth her, and has stated that if she does not come to see her father, she will burn in hell. I'm planning to leave after this in less than a week to a relative's house. My dad installed cameras in the house as well, and checks them religiously to see what time we leave, what time we arrive, and I have a lot of items to transport, and I'm worried what he's going to think or do if he sees me. Also, I need to mention that if I say no, or I don't agree with what he is saying, I'm quote-unquote disrespecting my father and I should get out of his face. I had to take out my piercings because of him. Couldn't have braids in for long. He says they're fine, but whenever he sees me with them, he tells me over and over again to take them out and that it looks ugly. I try to stick up for myself as best I can, but he's conditioned me to believe that I'm the one who should act like a second parent and bow down to him and be grateful. I've been losing weight, and he always watches me eat my food or else me and him will quote-unquote fight. Please excuse my grammar, but thank you for taking the time to read. The next one is an entitled parent story. I was visiting with a very good friend of mine this weekend after a mutual friend's birthday party. We'd all gone, but it wasn't really a place conducive to quiet enjoyment of a friend's company. There was lots of noise and lights and sugary birthday goodies that everyone partook in, including my friend's two sons. One of them isn't one yet, and the other is deeply entrenched in the terrible twos. The answer for everything is no, even when the answer was meant to be yes. It's hilarious, mostly because I can go home. My friend and his wife, they're tired, understandably so. So we were sitting in front of the TV and minding the boys while my buddy's wife wanted some time not spent in the immediate vicinity of her offspring, which honestly, fair. She drove off in her car and went I know not where, and we divided the labor equally. My friend had the kid who couldn't walk yet, and they were curled up on the couch. I think the intent was for a quiet nap. Me? I was stuck with the 2-year-old. And we had beef. At one point in the birthday party, I was playing skee-ball at an arcade and offered my last ball to the 2-year-old. He wound up like he was on a baseball mound, and I wound up having to go, no, 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 and intervene. He has yet to forgive me for this transgression. So my charge for a little bit decided watching Bluey was for suckers, and he was going in search of adventure. And I was following him around because that's what you do when someone places the welfare of their child in your hands. The whole time, he's sulking and glaring at me every time he realizes I'm still behind him. It was so hard not to laugh because it was so overblown and dramatic. So we're in the boys' room, and the kid I'm watching is currently trying to cram his little body under his bed and shouting about wanting mama. Tough luck, kid. Mama's taking a break. You're stuck with me, and then there's a knock at the door. It's a caseworker from CPS and a police officer. I didn't realize this at the time, as I was trying to make sure the kid's head wouldn't actually get stuck under the bed. I'd never live it down. My buddy answers the door and is rather alarmed to see the pair waiting at the door. Then they came in, and my buddy shouted for me to come back to the living room with the kid. So I scoop up my charge, and he starts squirming and squawking because he wanted to be under the bed, and clearly this is not under the bed. Matter of fact, this is the opposite. And he promptly shuts up. Because strangers. The caseworker goes on to explain that they've gotten reports about toddlers being left outside in the snow with only a diaper on, being left naked to run around the house, bruises on the kids, etc., etc. For the uninitiated, most toddlers, they cannot stand wearing clothes. They want out of them immediately. Even the hint of a chance at ditching the clothing, and they'll go for it. The cop looks around for a moment and says something to the CPS worker and then leaves. I sit with the 2-year-old, who was clothed by the way, and my buddy does all of the talking. I can tell he's furious, but I didn't really know why at the time. The caseworker wanders around the house a little bit, takes a look at both kids, then shrugs and says he can't see any evidence behind the report, but everyone has to be investigated. They'll be in touch, but it won't be a home visit unless new evidence or reports come to light. After the caseworker leaves, my buddy hands me the not-quite-1-year-old, takes out his phone and goes into the basement, and promptly starts screaming at the top of his lungs into the phone. The 1-year-old just went back to napping, and the 2-year-old showed some survival instincts. He just looked at me and said, "Daddy mad?" and watched TV with me and his brother. My friend's mother had some sort of mental illness flare-up on her out of nowhere. I don't really know the details because it's not my business, but what little I did hear about was horrific enough. Evidently, on Grandma's last visit, the 2-year-old managed to escape the clutches of bath time and wound up making a beeline straight out the open front door into the snow. He realized this was a poor life choice seconds after escaping, mostly from face planting into snow after tripping, and struggled not at all to be brought back in for bath time. Why was the door open? Grandma's new boyfriend was rather drunk, and attempting to bring in a pile of Christmas gifts that were arriving in late January. He fell down the stairs when he tried opening the door, so they just propped the door open to allow easier offloading. In a nutshell, crap happens. Kids have minds of their own and do their own thing. He was never in any actual danger, just a 2-year-old doing 2-year-old things. The fact that Grandma twisted the event in such a fashion honestly confuses me, especially since the root cause of the kid getting out at all wasn't even my friend's fault. The really messed up part about the report, though, the reason there was a cop there was that Grandma told CPS that her son was an alcoholic with a mean streak when he was drunk, and he kept a gun at the door. He does keep a gun by the door. It's a double-barrel shotgun in a small safe with a keypad, because he lives in the boonies and it's not unusual to see things like bears. To the best of my knowledge, though, the only time that gun is fired is at a range, so my buddy and his wife can use the weapon competently if the need should arise. Her own son, though? Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.